what I would like to share with you today, the work we have been doing from our perspective of how do we see inclusive innovation. So thanks, Amy, for the introduction, and thanks to ISDC for the opportunity. I feel very much pleasured and flattered to be here. Also very touching to see how the efforts have been put together and make this possible. So congratulations on the launching and to everyone that are involved. This work is jointly with two colleagues at the Alliance, Tenasis and Elisabetta. The three of us speak 7 languages in total, so we are putting money where the mouth is, and we can insult each other in different ways. So that's one way we can ensure inclusiveness in our work. Okay, so the starting point of our work is that in recent years, we see there's a worsening situation in farmer-herder conflicts in Africa. Just one quick point that in the past, this have always been persisted. It's not something new. Farmer-herder conflict has been continued in Africa for quite some time. It just recently, in the past decade, we see an increasing trend. When we say increasing, it means first, the proportion of farmer-herder conflicts in total conflicts, so the ratio of that farmer-herder conflicts in total number of conflicts, the absolute frequency, so in terms of actual magnitude, we see that's increasing. Intensity, so number of fatality in those conflicts. In all those aspects, also in geographical coverage, so in all those aspects, we see a worsening situation. Even though there are peaceful coexistence of these two groups, this is what we have been observing from the conflict data. So that's a very alarming situation. And the studies show that this can be partially attributed to the worsening climatic condition that increase competition over water, natural resource, and pasture. So to mitigate farmer-herder conflicts, both within CG and out of CG system, we see there's substantial investment in different innovations that try to mitigate this risk. Examples including better water infrastructure, better monitoring tool that tells the herder where water is, where pasture will be. So you try to help herder avoid the clash into farmer by better providing climate information services. We have a lot of climate risk mapping tools. You probably see that a lot in CG system. Different risk mapping, vulnerability mapping, different platforms that tells you where are the risk might be. Delineating grazing reserves. These are kind of a fencing and ways to kind of fencing an area that shows, no, this you don't enter here, or you can graze your animal here. So there are many different innovations to mitigate farmer-herder conflicts in the face of climate crisis. But in many ways, they're not reaching the level of success as planned. They have definitely many great achievements, but overall, we anticipate to see greater success, but it's not happening yet. And researchers have pointed out that one reason could be the lack of linguistic inclusiveness. So if you look at all these innovations, for many reasons, they tend to cater into the dominating language group for efficiency reasons, for cost-saving purposes. Most of these innovations are either the dominating language or even the common language, such as English. So for that, you kind of losing the opportunity to make it accessible and making broader group benefit from those innovations. So that's one limitation we have been observing. The other is that in those cases where climate shocks trigger more farmer-herder conflicts, there's complex interaction between different factors that makes it harder for those communities to solve themselves. So there's substantial interaction between different risk factors that the root cause of conflicts interact with what we call a multiplier or a magnifier that makes things escalate. And for that, it's less efficient if you only target one risk factor without considering their interplay. And that's another reason we want to look deeper into the interaction between those determinants. And indeed, we realized that linguistic diversity can actually interplay with climate shocks in affecting farmer-herder conflicts. Now, without any climate shock, we already see that in mixed language area, there are more conflicts, there are more fatal conflicts. This is due to many reasons. It can be due to religion reason, right? Because sometimes language group also overlap with religion, with ethnicity, with different social norms. So it's very complex root cause of those security issue. But then in the face of climate shock, we see those tensions escalate or expand due to the fight for resource. So that's kind of the background and where we get motivated to take a deeper look into the mechanism. And for that, we study in this paper the interaction between linguistic diversity and climate shock in affecting farmer-herder conflicts. And we do not only look at what has already what's already happened, but also we want to say something about what might happen in the future, given our projection about drought. There are places where currently there are relatively peaceful coexistence, but might evolve into future hotspot given the worsening climate conditions. So that's the future perspective. And our purpose is to use this information, use this evidence, as a way to inform more linguistically inclusive innovation that aims to mitigate farmer-herder conflicts in agro-pastoralism system in Africa. Now, there are several empirical challenges when we start exploring this topic. The first is it's a very limited data on language diversity. You probably see some very detailed language survey in a very small area. You don't have that throughout countries across Africa. So in the spirit of inclusive innovation and this special issue, we do want to have a broader coverage of countries rather than focusing on maybe a very small study region at the cost of sacrificing some in-depth knowledge about which detailed language people speaking. So for that, we use georeferenced language border from African language map and then validated with small-scale household survey that do have more specific information on language being spoken. So with that, we can ensure we are encompassing a large area in Africa, but still having some confidence on the accuracy of the language border. The second challenge we have is that we know that between single language and mixed language spoken districts, other confounders can also affect conflicts. And for that, we want to tease out those factors that are basically confounding the relationship we're interested in. And the method we're using to solve that challenge is something called spatial discontinuity design. Basically, we look at how things differ across the language border. So that's a very econometric way to construct counterfactual groups. And on top of that, we know that conflicts may be more persistent regardless of climate shock in mixed language districts. So what we do in addition to spatial regression discontinuity is to add also a difference in difference estimator that compares the difference between mixed language and single language area before after drought. So you can think of this as a very particular case of a difference in difference in difference. So for those layers we are kind of controlling over, we are able to see that what's left over is attributed to this interaction between language diversity and climate shock. And finally, we want to say something about what might evolve in the future. And for that purpose, we incorporate projections from a future drought, which tells you, okay, this area in the future, we anticipate more climate risk, which means you might want to have some anticipatory action in those areas as a preventative approach. So that's the empirical side. And this is to give you an idea of how the spatial estimation starts. So we start from the left, which we call global estimation, where all the observations enter the estimation. And then we move to something called local estimation, where you only look at those that near the border. So supposedly these are more comparable districts that has much more similar characteristics. So we have a more plausible counterfactual group to compare with. And we look at the difference between single language and mixed language districts before after drought. The unit of analysis is at district month level over 13 years. We look at these study regions in Africa, and there are 3 major language groups in those areas. Conflict data come from ACLED. For those of you who work with ACLED, these are georeferenced location of conflicts. We only look at conflicts that involves farmer-herder in the conflicts. On average, we observe about 2 farmer-herder conflicts in each month in the study region during the study period. Average fatality about 8, and that's increasing. Total fatality over 3,000 in our study period. drought data, we use SPEI, which is based on the distribution of historical rainfall, and that's the historic part. And then for future drought, it's based on SIMP5 assumptions. Okay, so to give you a very quick overview of the results, what we found is that the fatality rate of farmer-herder conflicts increase significantly when drought happens in a mixed language area compared to if the drought happens in a single language area. So imagine if the drought happens in mixed language area, we see significantly higher fatality rate. And then so that's what we observe in the historical period of 2010 to 2023. Now, when we incorporate projections of future drought, there's something very striking here. So for some districts where currently there's very low level of farmer-herder conflicts, in the future, because of the uncertainty from climate change, we actually anticipate to see increasing, such as Yanbiu area, we anticipate to see increasing trend in those conflicts, which means for government or our partners who wants to prevent conflicts in those regions, maybe that's where you want to target. But of course, this is based on projection. We trust the climate modeler, and but there's an uncertainty in terms of how accurate this projection could be. So implications for inclusive innovation. Well, based on our results, we see that conflicts tend to be more fatal in mixed language area when there's a drought, which means for innovations that aims to reduce farmer-herder conflicts, there might be a need to consider that fact, especially if it's a climate contingent innovation. So linguistic diversity can add up to the complexity and also how important it's important to have that factor in consideration when you design and deploy the innovation. The second is that future drought might alter the spatial distribution, which means in the designing phase of the innovation, that something needs to be taken into account. And in the spirit of scaling out, we have several recommendations based on our results. The first is that the inclusive of linguistic diversity expect to enhance the benefits for regions with multiple languages being spoken. And second, from a spatial heterogeneity perspective, we see that there's a stronger impact of this relationship at the border, so at the border between mixed language and single language districts, which means you might want to have some locally tailored innovation or intervention that are designed subject to the local context. And of course, there's a trade-off between having a very locally tailored innovation versus having something more generic, but that's a more practical issue, and happy to also hear from those of you who have experience on that. And then for the linguistic community, for a community that speaks multiple languages, we also anticipate to see outcome for those community if you are more if the innovation is more linguistically inclusive. We anticipate to see a broader benefits for those communities. So that's some of the main takeaways and recommendations we have based on our analysis. And thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to discuss more. Thank you.